The following is a presentation of Appalachian State University.
How do you improve policy and decision making? Appalachian State University students and faculty research current economic and policy issues, economic development, environment and energy, and public finance. They use 3 laboratories on campus to conduct their research. Coming up on Appalachian Perspective, we'll meet the man who coordinates this research that is helping improve decision making in North Carolina. Welcome to Appalachian Perspective. My guest today is Director of Appalachian Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis, Dr. Todd Cherry. Welcome, Todd. It's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
First, how long have you been at Appalachian State? Tell me a little bit about that.
I think it's going on 10 years now.
10 years.
10 years.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, in your role right now, you are the Director of the Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis. Fairly new center on our campus. So tell us about that work and what you do.
Well, it's the center is relatively new. It's been around a year, maybe 2, but the work it houses has been going on for 8 or so years, going back to when we started the Western North Carolina Economic Index, and that was like the first effort into this regional economic development engagement that we do. And that kind of grew into other activities, and we've adopted experimental economics and public finance and some other, and of course energy and the environment is big in the center. So eventually the activities grew so much that it made sense to have a center that kind of facilitated and managed those activities. So while the center's new, the activities that take place within the center have been evolving for the last 8 years or so.
Todd, do you have other faculty members that work with you, and how do you engage students in this work?
Well, yeah, we have probably 10 to 12 faculty members engaged in various projects throughout the center. We have different clusters underneath the center. We have an experimental economics cluster that looks at policy simulations in the lab, and then we also do energy and the environment, and then we do public finance and economic development, regional economic development. So we have these clusters, and each cluster has a program director, and so we have faculty engaged in those specific areas on campus. And we engage students. We have research assistants and that help us on individual projects on a need basis like that. So.
Todd, you're one of our faculty members that's frequently cited by the news media, whether it's radio, it's television, or the printed media, for research projects that you're working on. Sometimes you're just actually hired to do a project for them. So what are you working on right now? What's the hot topics?
Well, right now we just wrapped up a project that we worked on for the UNC system, and we looked at the research activity on the UNC campuses across the state, and really looking at the economic impact that they have on the state's economy. And so we just wrapped that up, and that's had some very interesting results. I think the data was from 2008, and the state in that year invested about $70 million into research on UNC campuses. And that in turn generated enough activity to generate about $800 million worth of economic activity for the state. And the real surprising result was that activity that it generates through hiring new researchers or bringing in people from out of the state to North Carolina, that new activity generates enough tax revenue that almost offset, and actually the estimate was a little bit higher than the initial $70 million invested. So it was a result in that was somewhat unexpected, but it was it was intuitive in the sense, because it's really providing seed money for research on the UNC campuses that then provides the faculty the capacity to go out and get external money and bring it to the state. So we go to get federal dollars or or funds from other states and bring them to North Carolina and have the activity in North Carolina, which would be taking place in other states if we didn't have that capacity here. So the state investing in that capacity up front enables the faculty and the campuses to generate that activity that wouldn't be here otherwise. So it's really a direct injection into the state's economy that makes a significant impact, and that really ignores the broader benefits of the research itself in terms of education and just the creation of new knowledge that takes place in the state.
And what was that number one more time? You said the system generated?
I think it was $840 million.
$840 million.
And that translated to about, I think it was 8,200 jobs. So in terms of, if you look at what the state does in terms of incentives to bring firms to the state, this is by far a better deal than you see in those other deals that they come up with.
Well, given the budget situation in our state and in every state, we have to be very careful about every dollar that's invested. We have to look at all centers and institutes. We've been charged to do that by people in Raleigh and Chapel Hill to make sure that we are doing things that do benefit our campus and our region and our state. The center where you direct, talk to me about how that really directs people in this region and and how it serves the people of North Carolina.
Well, it really, going back to the Western North Carolina Economic Index, the point of that project was to generate information that wasn't readily available to business and political leaders in Western North Carolina, because being in this part of the state, oftentimes we're overlooked in terms of information, and some of the issues that we face are overlooked. So that was one of the purposes of that report, is to not only provide timely information that can help decision making, but also highlight some of the issues that the region faces. So that's one aspect, is just providing information in a usable fashion. But we also through research, generate new information that isn't available. But we also try to take information that's available but disseminated in a way that's usable to business leaders and local governments as well.
In Western North Carolina, talk a little bit about how we're doing. I mean, you go to some areas where it's Boone or Asheville and you feel pretty good. You go to other areas and you feel kind of depressed about things. But how, as a region, do we compare to our state or other parts of our state?
Right. It's difficult because the region is it varies across the region. Obviously, you have Asheville and Hickory. We define Western North Carolina as including Hickory in that metro area. Yeah. So you get the rural counties, and then you got Asheville, and then you got Hickory, and even the foothills are different than the high country. And so there's a lot of variation in terms of economic conditions and even social conditions across the region. So when we do the monthly report that we do, we try to We give some broad idea of how the region's doing, but we try to break it down and try to acknowledge and take into account those differences within the region. And you're exactly right. There are some areas are doing well, some areas are not doing as well. If you look at the last decade, we just did a report on just reviewing the region's performance from, I think it started in 2000 to 2009, like a decade review of how the region performed relative to the state and the nation. And it was a tough decade for the country because there was 2 recessions in that period, but it was particularly hard on Western North Carolina. The first recession hit Hickory and the foothills extremely hard, and then this latest recession just hit everyone. It had different fundamentals that were taking place there, but over that period, in that decade, it was not a good decade because by 2009, the end of 2009, we were down 50,000 jobs relative to what we had at the beginning of that decade, and that's about 8% of our job base that we've lost. And the first recession wasn't as bad. I think we lost about 20,000 jobs in that recession. We regained those 20,000, and actually we were up 10,000 before this last recession, and that was, as everyone knows, a severe recession. We ended up losing 60,000 jobs in that recession. So we've gotten a little bit back since then, but we're still struggling in terms of job growth and creating those opportunities in the region. Now, obviously, the state and the nation as a whole, they're not doing as well either. But in relative terms, we did a bit worse, and a lot of that is in the Hickory area, because they were hit so hard in that 2001 recession that and they never really recovered. The old saying that in that recession, everyone's saying we're losing jobs, we're never going to get back, and that's exactly what happened. We didn't get those jobs back. So Hickory, in that Hickory, Lenore, and Morganton area, that metro area, you could characterize them as being in almost an 8-year recession, because they never really got out of the first one when the second one hit. So that's really driving a lot of the numbers in the Western North Carolina region.
When you look at this recessions from the state perspective, who has fared better? I mean, is there a way, or is it just been everybody?
Everyone's feeling pain, and the issue is is it disproportionately felt by one area or one group or one part of the state. And rural areas have been hit particularly hard. The Western North Carolina has been hit particularly hard. The first recession was more manufacturing based, so that was in the foothills where it's more manufacturing centered economies. Those were hit particularly hard. In this latest recession, we had it was more the housing bubble and financial. So Charlotte was hit particularly hard in that this latest recession. But the one area that did well, relatively speaking, was Asheville in that area, because it didn't have the manufacturing that was hit so hard in the first recession, and it felt some of the downturn in this latest recession, but it had a more I guess a firm foundation to hold itself up with.
If you had the chance to advise the governor, what would you say to help us do better or come out of this thing faster? What would be your advice?
It's really difficult question. I mean, it's there are things that can be done that might, I guess, speed up the recovery somewhat. But this is more of a national downturn. I think that one thing that's taken place in this last 9 years is our emphasis on attracting outside activities to the state. So we're doing a lot of bidding for projects or bidding for firms. And there's really 3 legs to economic development. And you create new opportunities, create new activity within your borders, your community, or your state. You can expand existing opportunities, make what you're doing better and more, increase it. Or you can attract someone else's activity to come to your state. And attracting industry from other states, that's really not economic development. That's just competing for someone else's development. Or you're competing for existing opportunities instead of creating new opportunities. And there's a place for that, but I think the difficulties we've faced recently has shifted our attention to doing that, because that's just short-term fix. That's a short-term approach to economic development. And hopefully we're not forgetting the long-term issues and workforce development and investment in infrastructure and those things that take a long time to see the return. But without those, you're not going to do very well. So that's I think that in the broader scheme, I think that would just keep in mind diversifying the activities and diversifying your efforts and taking care of some of the basics and not forgetting those while you're running after attracting activities from other states.
Well, if we have, and I agree with you totally, we've lost jobs that will never come back. So what do we do as a state? What do we do as a university to go out and help people say, here are the jobs of the future, or let me help you, even though you may have worked 20 years in one particular job that's now gone, it's not coming back. What do we do? How do we advise and how do we assist?
Well, what I tell my students is that it's a whole nother world out there, and things change so quickly, and we don't know what's going to be the jobs of the future. And I always tell my students that it's important to be flexible and have those skills that are transferable from one job to another job, because things just move so much faster now than they used to.
Are things, in your opinion, in the economy, are they better now than they were 8 months ago or a year ago? I mean, are we coming out of this?
The latest report we did, we saw a little uptick, and which was nice, because before that there were a few months where it looked like it was weakening, and whenever you have one data point, you can't really draw too many conclusions. You look for the trends. And we came out of the recession when the NBER defined the recession to end, and we saw some growth coming out of there. And then it stalled, and I think everyone kind of observed that and even experienced it to some degree. And there was some talk of a double dip recession, and we saw some weakening that was a possibility, albeit maybe not a high likelihood, but it was a possibility. But the latest numbers do show a little bit of an uptick that we're starting to see it maybe break that trend, which was a good sign in terms of prospects. But when you're talking about when you're talking about not declining and you're happy about that, then that tells you something about where you're at.
Right.
I mean, we still have so much ground to catch up in terms of a recovery. There's been estimates that it could be 5 years or more before we start seeing any kind of level of employment like we had before, just a few years ago.
Find an answer. We don't want to wait 5 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time. Now, being a non-economist, but listening to the news and trying to hear the reports, and they'll say things like, you do this data point here that's encouraging, and things are getting a little bit better. And the next thing they'll say is, but people aren't buying, they don't have confidence.
Right.
So if there are signs that say things are a little better, why don't we feel it? Why don't we know it?
Right.
How can we get to that point so that we do, as they say, spend things? I understand that spending thing. I get that.
Right. Yeah, because our economy is made up like 60%, 2/3 of our economy is consumption. So when people cut back, like they have, it makes a dent in our economic activity and our overall growth rates.
Right.
And it's. We were at such we were on such a high in terms of a bubble and almost living beyond our means to a certain extent that that coming back down, it's going to be a long time before we get back up to that level. And that's really what the problem is what's the counterfactual? What is the baseline that we're comparing ourselves to? And really to compare what we're experiencing now to where it was at the peak of the bubble isn't really a realistic comparison. So but it has a lot to do with confidence, and there really isn't a lot of confidence out there right now in terms of consumers. I mean, the good side of it is people are saving more. I mean, but the bad thing is that banks are also sitting on a lot of cash, and they're not. It's not out there, but you don't really know if it's the banks or whether maybe people just aren't borrowing because they don't want to take on that debt. So it's not at one point where when the crisis hit, everything kind of froze up, and it's not frozen now, but it's going to take some time before people start relaxing enough to where they can take some risks from the business community and the households in their consumption patterns.
And aren't the banks being a lot more strict now with whom they will to whom they will lend money, or allowing you to have a large down payment before they'll ever talk to you? Or
That's what I hear. That's what I hear. I have colleagues that have bought houses recently, and they've gone through the process, and it seems like it's working fairly well. But you never know what it's like for individuals in a different situation that people are trying to refinance now with the interest rates being so low. Refinancing has increased, but it's but I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to take it to the next level of confidence in spending.
Yeah, Todd, you are at a university that people ask at times, what do you do to really strengthen the economy of where you are? What is your role? What's the university's role in economic development? When you talk about strengthening the economy, actually we hire people, they have jobs for them, and we need people of all different skill set and all different education levels. So a university itself does things like provide jobs, but is the role more than that?
Yes, it is. We actually did a study that estimated the economic impact of Appalachian on the 5-county region, this high country region, and I think that we estimated that the economic impact was about $500 million for the region and generated about 5,000 jobs. So those are the impacts, the direct impacts that we have of just our existence. But that really isn't the mission of the university, because you could put any kind of state operation here and run it, and it would create activity and jobs.
Right.
There are some locations that they lobby to have a prison put in their county because it generates jobs. Right. So just the activity itself, while it creates jobs, that's really not the broader purpose of the university. And in my opinion, the university has a long-term perspective that is critical in terms of economic development for the state and the country. I talked a little bit about the 3 legs of economic development, and universities, if you think about it, historically they've always been about economic development, because we provide economic development one person at a time by giving them skills and education and knowledge so they can go out and succeed at a social level and economic level, right? And you add up all the individuals that go through all the universities every year. I mean, that is workforce development. So that's really what. That's our teaching mission, and that is one of our central objectives. And the research component is a more broader social economic development goal, where we generate new knowledge or new opportunities for society to take advantage of. So if you think about universities as a whole, we've always been about that economic development in that sense, but those are all long-term prospects, and that's the risk that we have to stay, or the threat we have to stay away from, in terms of universities responding to more of the short-term needs and demands. And our perspective is a long-term perspective, whereas the political arena and other agents in the state's economy, they look at more of the short term, and there's a role for that. But we don't want to fall into that realm of activity. We have a special role that we have to play, and we have to maintain that, I believe.
Well, in the center, what is one of the most, when I say to you, one of the most impressive projects that you all have come out with that might be an example of something with economic development, where you've taken something to advance it or brought innovation in that could benefit our state or our region?
Well, I think it's just knowledge, and I think that right now we just finished a study that we worked with the North Carolina Rural Center with, and it was looking at how individuals and households living at the economic margin, and it really wasn't looking at those that living in poverty, but the ones that are at risk of falling into poverty. Because one of the one thing that you might understand is it could be a lot easier and less expensive to address to keep people out of poverty than it is to bring them out of poverty. So if you could address those issues and address those risks that those households face that might push them into poverty, then you might be helping the state as a whole in the long run. So that project we just completed. We tried to look beyond the standard measures of income and employment numbers and look at some of the hidden context or the hidden risks that they face, like child care issues, transportation issues. Like if someone's car breaks down, does that mean that they can't get to work? Do they lose their job? And then that might put that whole household into a whole nother reality, right? So some states have experimented with transportation assistance or car purchasing assistance to help with those types of problems. So trying to look at and identify the specific risks that these households face so you could so policy can be better informed and better targeted to help those individuals.
Well, in addition to being a faculty member at Appalachian State University and the director of a research center, you're also a visiting scholar with the Center for International Climate and Environmental Research in Oslo, Norway. So tell me about that. How did you get that, and what are your responsibilities there?
Yeah, that's actually the second. I'm working on the second project that I have with them, and it's part of a larger research agenda looking at acceptability and feasibility of climate change policy. But it has broader implications than just climate change. It's about any policy, really, because one of the problems that we have is that we can't enact or implement solutions to some of the problems we have. Like we have some answers and we have solutions, but oftentimes public opposition, the government, operations just doesn't allow for those solutions to be implemented. So this whole research agenda is trying to look at some of the ways policymakers and policy can be designed or presented or even experimented with to try to overcome some of that opposition and aversion to some of these solutions. Because it's amazing, though, that individuals and the public can actually oppose policies that would actually make them better off. They just do not see how it would work, or they have misperceptions, or they just don't trust that the policy is going to be implemented the way it said it's going to be implemented. We just finished up a study that follows from Stockholm, Sweden, that they did a trial run of a congestion charge. So they have a traffic problem in Stockholm, so they proposed a congestion charge, which is a pretty common solution. It's essentially just a tax on driving, but initially 34% of the people only 34% of the people supported it. So the vast majority of people opposed it, thought it was a bad idea. So Stockholm, they said, all right, we'll do a trial run, and at the end of the trial run, we'll do a referendum to see what you think after you do it. So they essentially just said, well, we're going to make you eat your peas, right, and just try it and see if you like it. And then I can't remember how long the trial period lasts, but it was a long enough period that they experienced how the policy would work, the impacts of the policy. And then after it was over, they did a referendum and it passed by over 60%. So just experience and having a trial run in some cases can help facilitate a solution being enacted. And that wouldn't work for all cases, because the reason why that works so well is because you have an immediate you observe the results immediately, right? So they immediately saw congestion was alleviated. Other policies that have a longer term impact might not work. A trial run might not have that same effect, but that's just one example of trying to be creative in terms of seeing how we can get policy over the hump and make things better.
Well, Dr. Todd Cherry, thank you very much for being a guest on Appalachian Perspective. Thank you for the great job that you do for Appalachian and for the center in Norway. So we appreciate you very much. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Okay.